I need to tell you a little bit about it. These lectures are in a book now, and I can make it available to you. I ordered some, but they didn't get here in time for this Sunday, but I'll have them next Sunday. And I think the retail on it is about $17, but I can get them for 40% off, so probably $10 to make it even. Abraham, some of you have an interest, let me know about that, because we can only cover 6 of the 13 lessons, so 7 more are here to get the rest of the thing. This is in a whole series in which the Messianic Fellowship is publishing all of them, and they have a whole list of them here in the front. That's not all of them. It's probably about 15 to 16 books that are in the press. So far, we have Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, Joshua, Nehemiah, Elijah, and Elisha are all done. They're available now. But we keep on going. I'll be doing at the Cove this year, at the end of August, the book of Joseph. I'll be doing in July out in Oregon at Cannon Beach, Samuel. That should be published next in line, so we're looking forward to that. Now about the sheets here, you're all wondering, what in the world is this picture on the front? This is, I'm sorry, Brian copied these for me, and his ink sort of ran out after a while, so yours is a little different color, but you can kind of get the idea. This comes from a tomb in Egypt at a site called Beni Hassan, Benihassan, 1900 BC. And it shows these people coming down here. Oh, here, I'll ask you a question. See up here on the Egyptian writing, it's got hieroglyphics. On this end, they're numbers. You see the 1, you can get the 1s. How many 1s are there? Anyone? Count the 1s. 7. Yeah, 7. And those little U things upside down, they're units of 10. So how many people do they say in this writing? 37, good. 37, and then the word is Asiatics. You have a determinative there with a man walking. Do you see that? That means read this as men and what they're doing. So 37 Asiatics bringing, and then you see the eye there further on. They're bringing black eye paint. This is real cosmetics. And they're bringing black eye paint to trade in Egypt. And the people are, why did I put this here? Because Joseph had a coat of what? Many colors. We don't have any other period in Egyptian history. And these were Asiatics. That was the Egyptian name for people coming from Canaan. So these were Canaanite people who could have been Israelites bringing black eye paint to trade here. And you notice that some of them were, look at this donkey down here in the bottom thing for bellows for blacksmith work. And some were musicians. Let's see, I think I saw someone here. Yeah, with this guy second one on the bottom thing, he's got kind of like a little harp there. It is interesting. I'll say a little bit more about that. Their shoes, complete sandals covering their feet. And then the men's robe is down to their knees. And their preferred method of travel, which was the Patriarchs, was that of the donkey. So you've got three of them there, plus some other animals they were bringing for sale. So this is at the tomb of Khnum-Hotep II, and the tomb is at Beni Hassan. But at any rate, I don't know how I could identify that better with you. Now, here's an Egyptian, but you notice his dress is different from that of the people coming probably from Israel. Well, we need to get started because I have so much to tell you. I put down everything I know here, so I'll have to get something more for next week. But at any rate, this passage begins, and if you have your Bible, open it to chapter 11, verse 31 and 32. At the end of chapter 11, it said, Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram. He's called Abram at this point. Later on, he'll get a name changed to Abraham. But Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. They settled there in Haran, and Terah died in Haran. Why they never got to Canaan, I don't know. Terah was supposed to go. God told him to go. He did not. So I needed to tell you that in the background here of this particular section. So the study of the book of Genesis begins by seeing the book is in halves. There are two parts. There is chapters 1 through 11, up to verse 26. That's the pre-patriarchal or primitive history. And then from 11, verse 27, all the way to chapter 50, the end of that, is the patriarchal period. Each half is thought to have 5 sections, beginning with the phrase, these are the generations of, or something like that. You could also translate that, these are the histories of. Now, why is that important? 5 and 5. Because those rubrics, as they call them, because the Egyptians used to take out their red pen and put it in rubrics. So a rubric is in red, a heading. The other thing at the end of a section is a colophon. And actually we're going to see a bracketing with a rubric and a colophon to sort of bracket that off and say, this belongs together. And it gives us an interpretive clue here. So at any rate, we think that Moses, the writer of this, used sources. Just like Luke says, many have taken in hand to write a history of Jesus, but I've made a thorough investigation of all the sources. He says that in Luke chapter 1, the opening verses. So here too as well, we have the first section, 1 through 11, and source 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then with the patriarchs in chapters 12 through 50, 5 more sections. These are generations. These are the histories of. These are the ancestors of. So the second major section then of the book of Genesis is called the patriarchal history. And it has a heading, the first one, which is the one we want to focus on, chapter 11, verse 27 through chapter 25, verse 11. That's the Abrahamic material. Then there's a very, very brief section on Ishmael. That's where we get the Arabs. And that will be chapter 25, verses 12 through 18. Then comes the second major section, Jacob, chapter 25, 19 through 35. And then finally, Esau has a very brief section, the Arabs again, chapter 36, and then the Joseph materials, chapter 37 through 50. So the patriarchs are really 3 major sections: Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph. Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph, with 2 sort of sections intertwined with that on Ishmael and Esau. The 3 on Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph, however, are the most important because about approximately 10 chapters are given to Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph. So they make up 60% of what's called the patriarchs. Why do we call them patriarchs? Because that means the father rules. These are family units that are governed by the father, not by a king or anyone else. However, a better view of the book of Genesis is structured around 4 major centers, each with foundational concepts and persons, and then with a transitional section there. And I think in your notes I've given you how that would play out. So in an attempt to determine how these 4 major central areas, that is the primeval times, Genesis 1 through 11, then Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph, and then you have a transition, a guide between the sections works out according to the outline. Well, these generations, or to use the Hebrew word, toledot, comes from the verb yalad, to give birth, and the T is indicating it's a noun. So the word generations of occurs 39 times in the Bible. 12 of these occur in the first chapter of Numbers, with the tribes appearing once in Numbers chapter 3:1, 9 times in First Chronicles, and the book of Ruth lists the Davidic lineage down to David. So this leaves then 13 occurrences in the book of Genesis, 13 times, and they appear to be sources of material because you're going to ask the obvious question as I do. Where did they get this material? Moses comes along about the middle of the 15th century. How far back do we go? Well, before their time, at least. How old is the world? I don't know. There are people that do. But I don't know. And I just think it's very old, as best I can tell. But it's not, there's a difference between the age of the universe and the age of men and women. Men and women are very recent. the universe is very, very old. Very, very old. So some guy asked Martin Luther, how old? What was God doing? If he's eternal, I mean, he just made men and women about 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 BC. That's all. What was he doing all that time? Now, Luther was short of patience on people ask those kind of questions, and he said he was making hell for people like you to ask questions like that. He was not patient at all with what they were saying. So, at any rate, that's the background there. And I think we need to look at this patriarch Abraham, who is called the father who rules. The patriarch just means the father who rules. But Abraham is also called the friend of God 3 times. First Chronicles, and here, and in the book of Romans, and again the book of James, that he is called the friend of God. Romans chapter 4, we saw recently, Pastor went through that, in which he is called, Abraham is called the father of us all. And then he's called the father of all the nations too. So any blessing that comes to mortal men and women, I don't care which of the 220 nations of the world, they receive that through Abraham. The big story of the Bible is the promise that God gave to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David and the whole line that comes from him, even up to the present moment. And the whole world is mad at the people that were blessed with this blessing as a channel to give it to the whole world. And it's not that they are anti-Semitic, they are anti-God. That's the great problem that is there. In 1983, the Templeton Prize went to Alexander Solzhenitsyn for his address that was given. Remember, he talked about why such horrors had come to the Soviet Union that had broken apart. Here was his famous answer. This is what he got the Templeton Prize for. Quote, "Men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened." End of quote. Good for him. He said it straight away. When men forget and women forget God, that's why it's happening. People ask me, why is it happening today in the United States? The United States has forgotten God. That's why it's happening. That's why it's happening. And so, not only Alexander Solzhenitsyn, but also, I think, here Abraham begins to show us this same thing. Well, let me get into this. Abram was called a wandering Aramean. Aramean is Syrian. In Psalm 105, verse 12. One who had wandered from nation to nation. Why? Because he was a shepherd, and he was also called by God. Genesis chapter 20, verse 7 said he was a prophet too. So Abraham and Jacob are called prophets. So that call was repeated and reaffirmed by God in 2, 4, 5, 6 chapters. In chapter 12, chapter 15, chapter 17, chapter 18, chapter 22. Called by God. And this was repeated to his son in chapter 26, Isaac. And then it was repeated to his grandson, Jacob, in chapter 28, chapter 35, chapter 46. So the call involved the great promises of God. Number one, they're given a land strategic on the little piece of land that connects Africa, Asia, and Europe. Doesn't connect the Americas, but it connects almost everything else. And so people had to go through that in order to get to the other section. In other words, they had to be confronted with the promised doctrine, with the gospel itself. By the way, Galatians chapter 3, verse 8 calls that the good news, the gospel. It says that Abraham received the gospel ahead of time, saying, now I need my Victor Borga double quotes, so that you know this. In your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Gospel. That's gospel. And Abraham received that ahead of time. Was he saved in a different way? No. Nein, nix, nippa, niet. Any other way you can say no. All of them are the same. So he also was promised a seed, descendants. He was promised blessedness, which is no small thing. No small thing. The blessing of God that comes on the people that turn to him is amazing. And fame. He made Israel great, a number of passages. And protection. And influencer of all many nations. In your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And that's proven true. I won't take time to list out for you, but surely you are aware of it. So the scope of the Abrahamic narrative is one that you have the first rubric, and this is the account or the generation of Terah's family. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran in chapter 11:27. And the second rubric was, this is the account of the family of Abraham's sons. And that appears in chapter 25, verse 12. So there you have what's called the poetic form of inclusion. It has the beginning and the end. It's as if the writer, the Spirit of God, put a bracket around it and said, keep this material together. So that's the material we're going to pick 6 of the 13 lessons for you in these weeks, Lord willing. So Abram's story preceded Jacob's narrative, and Jacob's preceded Joseph's, and they were, all three of them were called fathers, or the chief heads of their family. The divine promise given to Abraham then comes in chapter 12, and it begins, the Lord had said to Abram, get out of here. Excuse me, that's my translation, but it is very, very bold in Hebrew. Get out of here from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. And then the "and" here, I think, should be translated in English, so that you will be a blessing. Why would God make them a great? He wanted to make them a blessing. Why would God make them a great nation? so that they could be a blessing. Why would he give them a blessing? So that they could give it to the rest of the world. So that. And then he goes on, he wasn't finished yet, verse 3. I'll bless those that bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And again, why? So that, I would translate the and once again here, so that all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. How many? All. How far? The whole earth? Are you kidding? What about Australia? Yeah, that's included. Well, what about New Zealand? Yeah, that's included. Yeah. What about the islands of the Pacific? Yes. So that all. Well, at any rate, that's what was declared there. And also Stephen, who in defending, remember in the book of Acts, his actions and his beliefs before the Sanhedrin, that was the 71 elders in Israel, and as one whom the apostles had appointed as a deacon. Remember, they said it's not right that the prophets should, or the pastors who need to give themselves to the teaching of the Word of God, those guys need to put their nose in a book and study so that they have something to give to the people. But we need someone to take care of the needs of the widows and the orphans and those who are oppressed. So we'll appoint 7 deacons. And then later on, they appointed deaconesses. The Bible actually has them. So did this church, used to. Well, at any rate, in Acts 7, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham. This is Stephen speaking now. The God of glory appeared to, and he says he's our father. So not only is he, Abraham, the friend of God and the father of us all, but the father of all nations. 1, 2, 3 titles among many others. And he said before he lived in Haran, he said, leave your country and your people, God said, and go to the land I will show you. Acts 7, verse 2 and 3. Acts 7, verse 2 and 3. So again, we note that it is puzzling to determine why Terah never finished the journey to Canaan. Did he come down with the COVID or something like this? But it merely says, I was guessing, but that Terah settled there in chapter 11, verse 31. But it was Abram who was the one who seemed to be the one who ended up being specially called by God, and who then left for Canaan. And that's why it says now in Genesis 12:1, get thee out. That's how King James put it. Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house in Haran, unto the land I will show you. So the prophet Isaiah had said the same thing, Isaiah 51, where he says, listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, and you who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were cut, and to the quarry from which you were hewn. Look to Abraham, your father, and to Sarah, who gave birth. When I called him, he was only one man, and I blessed him and made him many. Oh, yeah. 7 billion. That's a lot of people. That's Isaiah chapter 51. The same Lord who would later on also call other men, like, Elijah from the inhabitants of Gilead. And what about Elisha from his father's farm. He was plowing. He had the 12th tractor. Well, 2 oxen. I called them tractors. They were the John Deeres of that day. At the site of Abel Maholal. And from Amos, he was the prophet in Tekoa. And the apostle Peter from the fishing nets of the Sea of Galilee. And Matthew from collecting taxes just north of Capernaum and the Sea of Galilee. And even Oliver Cromwell from his farm in Huntington, and Martin Luther from his cloister in Erfurt, Germany. The same God is the one who called Abraham and who is still calling in our day and age. So Genesis 12, 1 through 3, then, most regard as the quintessence of the theology that lies at the heart of the story of Abraham. What Abraham is promised here is exactly what one Oriental monarch after another wished for. They hoped that their rule would produce such gifts as nationhood, such gifts as a great name, such gifts as divine protection, and such gifts as the means of being the conduit through which blessing would show to others. That's what every monarch has said, if only that would be me and my family. But God said, no, it'll be David, and it'll be this line coming through Israel. So Abram would spend most of his time in Hebron, Hebron. Some of us have been there a couple times, and you see the graves, the markings. They won't let you inside, but you look through a gate of 6 of the patriarchs that are there, buried, which is in the southern part of Canaan. So Abram is called the friend of God. 2 Chronicles 20, verse 7. There, the king Jehoshaphat of Judah prayed, "Our God, did you not drive out the inhabitants of this land before the people of Israel and give it forever to the descendants of Abraham, your friend?" See, that's spectacular. For God to say, "My friend Abraham," sort of like dropping a name, "My friend Abraham." That's what 2 Chronicles says. But what about Isaiah 41, verse 8? "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I've chosen, you descendants of Abraham, my friend," says God. Second time, my friend. My friend. And a third time, James chapter 2, 23. "And scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited, added up to him as righteousness." He believed God, and the Lord said, "Deal done. This man, stamp him righteous." Altogether in the right. The quality of being in the right. And go on with James 2:23. "And God called him my friend." That's what it says there. James chapter 2, verse 23. So that's where I got the title for the book. Abraham, the friend of God. I've got 3 reasons for saying so. The first one, in 2 Chronicles 20, verse 7. The second one, Isaiah 41, verse 8. Third one, James chapter 2, 23. No wonder then that the town of Hebron, or Hebron, it's said both ways, one's in Hebrew, was that It's known today by the Arabic name El Khalil, Khalil. L-E-L, new word, Khalil, which means what? What's the name of that town, Hebron? The friend. The friend. What? What's more natural? Abraham was the friend of God. They called the city where he dwelt the friend. The friend. El is the. So the friend, an obvious reference to Abraham. God made him a great nation, and we look forward to the large population, an extensive number of people, and a fairly large place for the people to dwell. But he also gave them a great name. Usually in Scripture, only the name of God is said to be great. That's true in Joshua 7:9, 1 Samuel 12:22, and Malachi 1, verse 11. But such a hope for greatness was the dream of many a royal person back in antiquity, and some in the modern era as well. However, in Scripture, the promise of making one's name great seemed to be restricted to the Abrahamic covenant and to the Davidic covenant. There, in those two words, which the word covenant there, that to make a covenant, literally in Hebrew is to cut a covenant, karat. I used to teasingly say to my Hebrew class, this comes from the word there, karat, which is to cut in Hebrew. It's an ancient, now don't put this down, this isn't true, I'm fooling them, but I'm telling them it comes from an ancient Japanese root, karate. They write it all down. So that's being taught all over the world. Well, at any rate, it's just a way to remember it, but it does mean, remember they cut the bigger animals in half and formed an aisle down the center. And then the two birds, they were too small, so they didn't cut them. So when they made a covenant, the person or persons who were partners to that covenant walked between the pieces, saying, may I, then you put your name, be like these animals if I don't keep my word here. But in the case of the Abrahamic and Davidic covenants, now watch this, there's a big division in church on this, but it's clear from the biblical text, Abraham is snoozing over on the side. It says he was in a deep sleep, the same kind that Jonah was down in the belly of that ship, you remember. There's a great storm upstairs. He's zonked, and it's just out of it. So Jonah was zonked, and so was Abraham. Who walked between the pieces? The Lord himself. What does the Lord say? Lord says, if I don't keep this promise I made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, may I die like these animals. Goodbye religion. Goodbye future hope. Goodbye anything beyond the grave. It hangs on those texts. They are extremely important. But if a great name doesn't come by just saying it, some of you know my Nancy's great grandchildren asked her, what do we call you? And she said, well, I'm great grandmother. And they said, well, what about Walter, meaning me? And she said, well, he's a great grandfather, sort of step-grandfather. And so they said, all right, we'll call him Great Walter. Yeah, yeah. So I'd be pleased if you all follow suit there. Well, get out of here. Well, at any rate, he also says, I will curse whoever curses you. God promised to provide his protection by actively intervening for his people Israel. So those who opposed Abram, Isaac, Jacob, and David, and all the way up to the present thing, were said to, now actually the Hebrew here doesn't say curse, even though our English translated it that way, who are said to disdain you. That's what the English says here. The English says the curse, but the Hebrew says, for those who disdain you. Verse 3, chapter 12. So Hebrew used the milder form. It comes from the Hebrew word kalal, Q-A-L-A-L, to disdain. For those kinds of assaults that are raised against Abram. God used a different term that indeed they would lose the blessing, and therefore he would bring a judicial curse on them. But the great word, of course, in the Bible is this form, to bless. And it occurs here over and over in Genesis. It is one of the key points of Genesis, 88 times. Okay, through the whole Old Testament, it's 310, but that's distributed through all the books. But not so, it's intensively here in Genesis. 88 times he promised to bless his people. So the Greek translation, Septuagint, the Latin translation, Vulgate, and the Jewish Targum correctly rendered this as a passive verb. They will be blessed. Not bless themselves, but be blessed. But what do many of the modern translations do? Not the NIV and not the ESV, but others, they translate it in a reflexive way. May we bless ourselves as Abram did. What good's that? Bless ourselves? And anyway, the Hebrew text doesn't bear that out. So it is a great statement of Scripture that when you ask, why is it that these United States have been so blessed? Because our grandparents and our parents were those who feared God, and they walked with him. And the question is, what kind of heritage are we leaving for our kids and grandkids? That's the question Solzhenitsyn raised for Russia. The same question needs to be raised for us today here. What was Abram's response to God's call? Well, in chapter 12, verses 4 through 9, he commanded Abram to go, or as I've said more dramatically, get out of your father's household. So Abram went as the Lord had told him. In verse 4, it says that, Abram is seen as the one who was most obedient to the divine command. Genesis 17, verse 23. Some feel that Abram left Haran 60 years before his father died, but that's not so. Acts 7, verse 4, in Stephen's speech, he indicates Abram left Haran after his father died. That's an important point, because if you look back at the biblical text, it says here in chapter 11 verse 22, Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. And when did this take place? Terah was 70 years old. But wait a minute. If Terah was 70 years old and he lived in chapter 11, verse 32 for 205 years, okay, 205 minus 70, something's wrong here. We've got 60 years out of place. And that tells us that the Hebrew expression, he began having children at his 70th birthday. So when was Abraham born? Exactly on Terah's 130th birthday. 130th birthday. And therefore, that helps us with this understanding. So, Terah set out to go to Canaan, and verse 5. However, he settled down in Haran, which is up north on the Euphrates River. So I imagine they went 500 miles north before they crossed over the Euphrates and went over to Damascus and then down into Israel. Abram acquired property which included herds and servants and gifts. So for the second time, it mentions the fact that Lot went with Abram, for there must have been a close relationship between Abram and his nephew. Lot was a nephew. And Abram traveled through the land, verse 6, chapter 12, verse 6, thereby indicating he must have journeyed south from Haran through the city of Damascus, passing by the north side of the Sea of Galilee as he moved south and west to the city of Shechem, which is east of modern Nablus. Joshua claimed that Shechem lay in the middle of the land of Canaan. Joshua chapter 20, verse 7. At that city, there was an oak of Morah, M-O-R-E-H, perhaps the same tree that's found in Judges chapter 9, verse 37. What does Borah mean? Teacher, one who teaches. So it seems to indicate, according to some, that this was the place where one went to obtain, outside of divine revelation, an oracle from a deity. But most likely, it's the fact that it was the place where the Lord would appear. And, of course, this is so. Nancy and I were at the well of Jacob, which is right there and nearby in Shechem. And I dropped the bucket down. It must have been 200 feet down, filled it up, cranked it up, and we took a drink of very cold water out of the well of Jacob. And on Shechem means shoulders, and the two shoulders on either side, Mount Gerizim to the north and Mount Ebal to the south, which are only about 500 feet apart at the base. So Moses said, when you get into the land, put 6 of the tribes on Gerizim, 6 of the tribes on Ebal. You people say the blessing, and you people say the curses, out of Deuteronomy 28. And the antiphony, one blessing, a curse. One blessing, a curse. One blessing, a curse. That's what it means, antiphony, as you know. And so they gave the blessing there, and that's the first place that Abram set up an altar. So when you come to the blessing of God, what's the first thing you do? Worship. So how can we find the trail of Abraham? Same way detectives do in their stories. How do you find who did it in the crime? Follow the money. You follow the money. So how do you trace patriarchs? Follow the altars. Follow the altars. And he built them in one city after another. After he got and received the blessing of God, he does what we should do. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Look at that, how God has blessed us. We've just been blessed and blessed and blessed. So we should be turning back to God. And he built there an altar, which, by the way, is still there. It's still there. Now, that we didn't get to see. But I learned about 3 months ago, they're putting through a road, and the Arabs were disregarding the base of this thing and actually cut with their bulldozer part of this 24-foot square base for the altar where it was set. Still, most of it's there, but it has now been damaged by this particular thing. But that's where it started. Up north, near Nablus, whenever you see trouble that breaks out, it will either be down in Hebron, that I was just mentioning about, which is the name, the friend, or it will be up here at Nablus, right near Shechem. The two of them are very high tension points. Well, at any rate, Abram moved on from Shechem to the valley, where it was between the valley, between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, and he went to the hills east of Bethel. And there he set up another altar to God. Well, we need a conclusion. Genesis 12, 1 through 9, permanently displays the divine call of God to one man. Oh, it's interesting. We are halfway through the Old Testament, at least. On the most conservative view, they say about 4,000 something is the beginning of mankind. I still don't know that exactly. I think Abraham 2100 BC is the earliest person I can date. But even if that is so, that means we are halfway at the 2000 mark approximately from the beginning, 4,000, to Christian times. Therefore, God waited that period of time and dealt only with the stories that we have in Genesis 1 through 11. That covers as much time as Genesis 12 through Malachi. It's amazing in terms of distribution of what God has done. And the list of promises mentioned in this section of Genesis meant that they would be available to Abraham from the hand of God. Abraham acknowledged this by acts of worship as he traversed the land of Canaan, almost from one end to the others, thereby showing he knew the extent of the promise that God had made to him. As part of these promises, this man was to be the father to the children who would inherit not only the land, but all the gifts that God was going to send as a conduit through these people. Don't forget, even when we come to Romans chapter 1, verse 16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Gentiles, yes, but also priority. Why? They're the conduit. They're the conduit. And that's how God was going to bring a blessing to the whole world. So, if we want to talk about questions here for thought reflection, why did he stop at Haran for the rest of his life and never went on to Canaan, where God had called him? I don't know. That'll be one of the questions to ask in heaven. So if you're making notes, I'll put that one down. Second, how important a factor is the blessing of God for the world and for the rest of Scripture? It is the whole ball of wax. It's the whole deal. Everything God's going to do, it comes through his blessing. And then can you guess why Lot was so closely associated? Here, a nephew leaves his father and goes with Abraham. Why? Why? I don't know. And then why is the land promised? Why is that so important? Not only in this text, guess what? 200 other passages in the Old Testament. It's important. Very important. And yet, it is one of the great difficulties of our day. Some of you may have seen some years ago, there was a Christian film that got into our theaters for just 1 or 2 days on the Exodus. No passage, no event is more prominent in the Old Testament than God bringing the people, a whole nation, from the most powerful empire that ever existed up to that time. The Egyptian empire was enormous in power. It was the Soviet Union of its day. No, I guess today you have to say it was the Chinese government of that day. But yet, on the other hand, here, God put and invested his people, this group of people. Why? Were they the most numerous? No, Deuteronomy says wrong. They were the smallest. Well, maybe they were most faithful, and they followed the Lord. No, they were the worst. They were the worst. Matter of fact, Jeremiah got some people, and he brought them, the Lord said, bring them into the house of God, Rechabites. And they came in. He said, now, give them all a glass of wine. And they said, no, can't do that. They said, why? They said, because our great father, he said we shouldn't drink wine. And Jeremiah is stunned. He said, you are keeping that rule because a human being said that? They said, yes. Oy vey, he said, that's not in the text. But he said, God says, I have trouble with my people. I'm God, and they don't follow me. But they follow this man. Is it possible for mortals to follow the law? Yes. Look at them. Look at them. That's the point of Jeremiah 25. And so here, this land promise puts in concrete, in hard dirt, the spiritual as well as the physical, so we don't separate them and think this is mystical, it's otherworldly, it's supernatural, it doesn't belong to our kind of climate. Oh, no. It's right here where we live. Right here where we live. But let's give thanks to the Lord for our lesson. So, Lord, we bless your name together. You've blessed us with the amazing word that has come through your friend, Abraham. Thank you that he has become the father of all who believe, the father of all the nations who believe, and the one who has been the vehicle through whom the oracles of God have come, and which you've given him blessing upon blessing. Thank you for the heritage we have in your name and coming through the ministration of angels that gave the word to Abraham. Now we receive it with great joy. Help us as we look forward to the conclusion of all these things, because they have an end and is coming to exactly the climactic purpose that you set for us. So lead on, O King Eternal, for the day of your appearance seems very, very close. We look forward to it, for it's in your name we pray. Amen.